I never thought I'd be the one to find her. After 15 years of searching, after countless search parties had combed through these mountains, after her family had long stopped putting up missing person posters, I was the one who stumbled into that cave and discovered what happened to Emily Crawford. And what I found wasn't just a missing girl. It was something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the forests of Northern California and the creatures that supposedly didn't exist within them. My name is Dr. Catherine Hayes. I'm a wildlife biologist, and in 2002, I was 34 years old, working for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. My specialty was large predator behavior, specifically black bears and mountain lions in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. I'd spent the better part of a decade studying animal movements, tracking migration patterns and documenting den sites. It was solitary work that suited me perfectly. After my divorce 3 years earlier, I'd thrown myself into my research, spending weeks at a time in the backcountry with nothing but my equipment, my notebooks, and the wild. It was mid-September when I received the assignment that would change everything. A rancher near the small town of Crescent Mills, about 60 miles northwest of Lake Tahoe, had reported unusual livestock deaths. 3 calves had disappeared over the course of 2 weeks, and he'd found the remains of one partially buried near the tree line. The description he gave, the way the carcass had been handled, the deliberate nature of the burial didn't match typical bear or mountain lion behavior. My supervisor thought it might be worth investigating, possibly a rogue bear with abnormal patterns that we'd need to track and relocate. I packed my Ford Explorer with 2 weeks' worth of supplies. My camping gear, field equipment, trail cameras, GPS units, and enough freeze-dried meals to last me through the assignment. The drive from my office in Sacramento took about 3.5 hours, winding through increasingly rural highways until I reached Crescent Mills, a town so small it barely registered on most maps. Population 372, according to the faded sign at the town limits. The rancher, a weathered man in his 60s named Tom Bridger, met me at his property on the afternoon of September 17, 2002. His ranch sprawled across nearly 2,000 acres, butting up against the Plumas National Forest. Standing on his back porch, you could see nothing but rolling hills and dense pine forest stretching to the horizon. "Dr. Hayes," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that spoke of decades of hard work. "I appreciate you coming out here. Fish and Wildlife sent someone 6 months ago about a different matter, but this is different. Something's not right in those woods." "Tell me about the calves," I said, pulling out my notebook. Tom led me to his barn and showed me photos he'd taken of the remains. The calf had been a yearling, probably 250 pounds. What was left of it had been found about a quarter mile into the forest, in a small ravine near a creek. The carcass had been partially consumed, but what struck me immediately was how it had been handled. The body had been dragged to a specific location and covered with branches, leaves, and forest debris in a methodical pattern. "This doesn't look like a bear cache," I observed, studying the photos closely. "Bears will sometimes bury food, but this is too deliberate, too organized." "That's what I thought," Tom said. "And there's something else. The tracks I found nearby, they weren't bear tracks. They weren't anything I recognized." He pulled out another set of photos. These showed impressions in the soft earth near the burial site. My breath caught. The prints were large, at least 15 inches long, with a clear heel, arch, and 5 distinct toes. They were humanoid in shape, but far too large to be human. "Could be a hoax," I said, though even as I spoke, something in my gut told me otherwise. The prints were deep, showing significant weight, and the spacing between them suggested a stride length of nearly 6 feet. "I've been ranching this land for 40 years, Tom said quietly. "I know what bear prints look like, I know cougar, deer, elk, every animal in these mountains. These tracks, I've seen them before years ago, but I never said anything because people would think I was crazy. But Dr. Hayes, there's something in those woods. Something that walks upright and is smart enough to bury its kills. I need to see the site, I said. Can you take me there? We hiked out the next morning at dawn. Tom led me along game trails and through thick undergrowth until we reached the ravine. It had been 2 weeks since he'd found the carcass, and most of the remains were gone now, likely scavenged by smaller predators. But the burial site was still visible, and more importantly, I found additional tracks. I spent 3 hours documenting everything. Photographs from multiple angles, measurements, plaster casts of the best prints, soil samples from the burial site. The tracks were fresh, probably no more than 3 or 4 days old, based on how crisp the edges were. Whatever had made them had been here recently. I'm going to set up a base camp, I told Tom as we hiked back. I need to monitor this area, set up trail cameras, see if I can identify what we're dealing with. You be careful out here, he said, genuine concern in his voice. My grandfather used to tell stories about these mountains, about things that lived in the deep forest, things that were here long before we were. I always thought they were just stories, but now, I don't know. I set up my camp that afternoon in a small clearing about half a mile from the rancher's property line, close enough to civilization for safety, but deep enough into the forest to be useful for my research. I pitched my North Face 4 season tent, organized my gear, and began the methodical work of setting up a perimeter of trail cameras. I placed 12 cameras in a rough circle around the area where the tracks had been found, each one motion activated and equipped with night vision capability. The clearing I'd chosen was perfect for my purposes. It sat on slightly elevated ground with good drainage, surrounded by a mix of Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. A small seasonal creek ran about 30 yards to the east, providing fresh water. I could hear it gurgling over stones, a constant white noise that was oddly comforting. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, illuminating patches of forest floor where wildflowers still bloomed despite it being late September. As I worked, I found myself thinking about my ex-husband, David. He'd hated my fieldwork, hated the weeks I'd spend alone in the wilderness. He wanted a wife who came home every night, who attended dinner parties and neighborhood barbecues, who fit into the suburban life he'd envisioned. When I'd chosen my career over his vision of domestic bliss, the marriage had crumbled. 3 years later, I still sometimes wondered if I'd made the right choice. But standing there in that forest, breathing air so clean it almost hurt, feeling the peace that only true wilderness could bring, I knew I had. I spent the remainder of that first day familiarizing myself with the surrounding terrain. I hiked in widening circles from my camp, noting landmarks, identifying game trails, documenting the area in my field notebook with the obsessive detail that had made me good at my job. I found fresh deer scat, claw marks from a black bear on a ponderosa pine about 40 feet up where it had climbed to reach a bee's nest, and the scattered feathers of what looked like a blue grouse that had met its end courtesy of a hawk or eagle. What I didn't find were any more of those massive footprints. Whatever had made the tracks near the burial site either wasn't using this part of the forest regularly or was being extremely careful about where it stepped. The absence of evidence was almost as interesting as evidence itself would have been. It suggested intelligence, awareness, caution. As the sun began to set, I returned to camp and started a small fire. I'd brought a portable propane stove for cooking, but there's something primal and comforting about a wood fire. I kept it small, fed it with dry twigs and branches I'd gathered, and watched the flames dance as darkness settled over the forest. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun disappeared. I pulled on my fleece jacket and wool hat. then sat in my folding camp chair and ate a dinner of rehydrated chili that tasted better than it had any right to. The night sounds began as the last light faded. An owl hooted somewhere to the north, that classic hoo-hoo-hoo that always sounded like a question. Something small rustled through the undergrowth nearby, probably a wood rat or a squirrel making a final foraging run before settling in for the night. In the distance, I heard what might have been coyotes yipping, their voices rising and falling in that chaotic chorus that sounds like far more animals than are actually present. I'd spent countless nights alone in the wilderness over the years. I knew the sounds, knew what was normal and what wasn't. I knew how to read the forest's mood. And that first night, everything felt normal. There was no sense of being watched, no unusual quiet that might indicate a large predator nearby. Just the ordinary symphony of a healthy ecosystem going about its nocturnal business. I turned in around 9, crawling into my sleeping bag and switching off my headlamp. The darkness inside the tent was absolute, the kind of pure blackness you only get far from any artificial light. I lay there listening to the creek, to the wind moving through the pines, to my own breathing gradually slowing as sleep approached. My last thought before drifting off was wondering what the trail cameras might capture tonight, if anything. The first 3 nights were uneventful. I spent my days exploring the surrounding forest, documenting wildlife signs, mapping the terrain. Black-tailed deer were abundant. I counted tracks from at least 15 different individuals in the area around my camp. I saw evidence of black bears, found mountain lion scat near a rocky outcrop, normal Sierra Nevada wildlife activity. On the second day, I hiked to a ridge about 2 miles north of camp and spent several hours glassing the valley below with my binoculars, looking for any signs of unusual activity. I saw elk grazing in a meadow, a golden eagle circling thermals high above, and what I initially thought was a bear but turned out to be just a particularly large boulder covered in dark moss. Nothing out of the ordinary. I called my supervisor, Dr. James Morton, on my satellite phone that evening to check in. The conversation was brief and professional. I reported the tracks I'd found, described the burial behavior, mentioned I was monitoring the area with trail cameras. I didn't mention my suspicion about what had made those tracks. James would have thought I'd lost my mind. Hell, I half thought I'd lost my mind, but I kept thinking about those footprints, about the size, the depth, the stride length, about the methodical way that calf carcass had been buried. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was purposeful, intelligent action, and if it wasn't a bear or a mountain lion, and it clearly wasn't human, then what was it? I'd read about Bigfoot, of course. Every biologist working in the Pacific Northwest had heard the stories, seen the grainy photographs, listened to the tales from hunters and hikers who swore they'd encountered something impossible in the deep woods. The Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967 was famous in cryptozoology circles, that shaky footage of a large bipedal figure walking across a clearing in Northern California. Experts had debated its authenticity for decades. Most of my colleagues dismissed it all as hoaxes and misidentifications, people seeing what they wanted to see, or deliberately fabricating evidence for attention or profit. The scientific consensus was clear. There was no credible evidence for the existence of an unknown large primate in North America. Any competent biologist knew that. But then again, history was full of examples of science being wrong. The coelacanth had been thought extinct for 65 million years until a living specimen was caught in 1938. Mountain gorillas weren't confirmed to exist until 1902, despite local people insisting they were real for generations before that. New species were being discovered all the time, even large mammals in remote areas. Could it be possible? Could there really be a population of large, intelligent primates living in the vast wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest, successfully avoiding scientific detection for centuries? The rational part of my brain said no, but the part of me that had seen those tracks, that had studied the careful burial of that carcass, that part wasn't so sure. The third day brought rain, a steady drizzle that turned the forest floor into a carpet of mud and made hiking miserable. I spent most of the day in my tent, reviewing my notes, backing up photographs to my laptop, and reading a paperback novel I'd brought for exactly these kinds of weather delays. The rain drummed on the tent fly with a soothing rhythm, and I found myself dozing off several times during the afternoon. That evening, the rain stopped just before sunset. I emerged from my tent to a forest transformed. Everything dripped with moisture. The smell of wet earth and pine was overwhelming and intoxicating. The light had that peculiar quality that comes after rain, everything seeming sharper, more vivid. I decided to do a quick check of my nearest trail cameras before darkness fell, to make sure they were still functioning properly after the rain. I was about 50 yards from camp, checking camera number 3, when I heard it for the first time. A vocalization, distant but clear, echoing through the wet forest. It started as a low hoot, almost like an owl, but deeper, more resonant. Then it rose in pitch, becoming a howl that made every hair on my body stand up. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then cut off abruptly. I stood frozen, my hand on the trail camera, my heart pounding. That was no owl. That was no coyote or wolf. That was something else entirely, something large and vocal, and unlike anything in my years of wildlife study. The forest had gone silent. Even the normal evening chorus of birds had stopped. It was as if everything in the woods was listening, waiting to see what would happen next. I waited too, barely breathing, straining my ears for any other sound. Nothing. Just the drip of water from branches and my own racing pulse. I finished checking the camera with trembling hands, then quickly made my way back to camp. The sun was setting fast now, the shadows deepening between the trees. I built up my fire larger than usual that night, the flames pushing back the darkness, making me feel slightly less vulnerable. I sat with my back against a log, my bear spray within easy reach, and listened to the night. But on the fourth night, September 21st, something changed. I woke at 2:17 in the morning to a sound I'd never heard before. It was a vocalization starting low and guttural, then rising to a high-pitched wail that echoed through the forest. It lasted maybe 15 seconds, then stopped abruptly, leaving only the normal sounds of the night. My heart was pounding. I grabbed my flashlight and my can of bear spray, but I didn't leave the tent. Whatever had made that sound was close, maybe within 100 yards of my camp. The sound had come from the northwest, the same direction as that distant vocalization I'd heard 2 nights earlier. But this was much closer, much more immediate. And there was something in the tone of it, something that communicated emotion, not just a random animal noise, but a deliberate call, a message of some kind, though I had no idea what it meant. I lay in my sleeping bag, every muscle tense, listening with an intensity I'd never experienced before. My scientific training told me to analyze what I'd heard, to categorize it, to compare it with known animal vocalizations. But my hindbrain, that ancient part that still remembered when humans were prey, was screaming at me to be afraid. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. The normal night sounds gradually resumed. An owl called. Something small scurried through the undergrowth nearby. The forest was returning to its usual rhythms, as if whatever had made that call had moved on. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It's a sensation that's hard to describe if you've never experienced it. That prickling awareness that eyes are on you even when you can't see them. Every shadow outside my tent seemed to contain a presence. Every rustle of wind through the pines sounded like footsteps. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there in the darkness, my headlamp within reach, but switched off, my ears straining for any hint of danger. When dawn finally began to lighten the eastern sky, I felt relief wash over me like a physical wave. I emerged from my tent exhausted but determined. I needed to check my trail cameras. It took me most of the morning to collect the memory cards from all 12 cameras and return to camp. I loaded them into my laptop one by one, fast-forwarding through hours of footage. Deer, a black bear passing through, a family of raccoons, normal wildlife activity, until I got to camera 7. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m., 3 minutes before I'd heard that vocalization. The camera had been triggered by movement at the edge of its detection range. At first, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then, moving from right to left across the frame, a figure appeared. It was massive, at least 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair. It moved upright on 2 legs, walking with a gait that was simultaneously human and not human. The creature paused for just a moment, turning slightly toward the camera, and I got a clear view of its face. Flat nose, heavy brow ridge, eyes that reflected the camera's infrared light with an amber glow. Then it continued moving and disappeared from frame. The entire clip lasted 11 seconds. I played it 17 times, zooming in, studying every frame. This wasn't a bear standing on its hind legs. This wasn't a person in a costume. The movement was too fluid, the proportions wrong for human anatomy. The arm length alone, the arms hung nearly to its knees, was impossible for our species. I sat back in my camping chair, my hands trembling slightly. I'd just captured footage of something that wasn't supposed to exist. A Sasquatch, a Bigfoot. Whatever you wanted to call it, I had it on video, and it had been walking through the forest, less than 200 yards from where I'd been sleeping. The logical part of my brain, the scientist trained to be skeptical, wanted to find alternative explanations. But I'd spent a decade studying wildlife in these mountains. I knew how animals moved. I knew what bears looked like on trail cameras, how they behaved, how they walked. This was something else entirely. I needed to report this to my supervisor, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That I'd found evidence of Bigfoot? I'd be laughed out of my career. The scientific community had spent decades dismissing Sasquatch sightings as hoaxes, misidentifications, or the products of overactive imaginations. Presenting this footage without more evidence would be professional suicide. I decided to wait. I would gather more data, more footage, more physical evidence, build a case that couldn't be dismissed. I reset all the cameras, adjusted their positions based on the creature's apparent path, and waited. 2 more nights passed with nothing unusual. Then, on September 24th, I woke again to strange sounds. Not the vocalization this time, but what sounded like wood knocking. 3 distinct strikes, a pause, then 3 more. The sound came from the northwest, deeper into the forest. I checked my watch. 3:22 in the morning. This time I made a decision that was either brave or incredibly stupid. I grabbed my heaviest flashlight, my bear spray, and my digital camera. I emerged from my tent slowly, quietly, and began moving toward the source of the sound. The forest at night is a different world. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, creating dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. Every snapping branch, every rustle of leaves made my heart race. I moved carefully, trying to be quiet, following the direction the sounds had come from. After about 10 minutes of slow, cautious movement, I noticed something unusual. There was a faint smell in the air, musky and organic, like a wet dog mixed with something earthier. I'd smelled similar scents around bear dens, but this was different, stronger. Then I saw light ahead, not artificial light, but the silvery glow of moonlight filtering through a break in the canopy. I moved toward it and found myself at the edge of a small clearing I hadn't encountered before. And there, on the far side of the clearing, I saw movement. The creature was there, just at the edge of the tree line. Even in the darkness, I could make out its massive form. It was facing away from me, doing something I couldn't quite see. I raised my camera, adjusted the settings for low light, and pressed the shutter. The flash fired automatically. I'd forgotten to turn it off. The creature spun around instantly, and for just a moment, I saw its face fully illuminated. Dark brown eyes wide with what looked like surprise or alarm. A face that was simultaneously ape-like and hauntingly human. Then it was gone, crashing through the underbrush with shocking speed, disappearing into the forest in seconds. I stood there frozen, my camera still raised, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I'd just been face to face with a Bigfoot, and I'd scared it away. I returned to my camp quickly, no longer trying to be quiet. When I was safely back in my tent, I checked the photo I'd taken. The flash had illuminated the clearing beautifully, catching details I hadn't been able to see in the darkness. But the creature itself was just a blur of motion at the edge of the frame, already in mid-flight. What I did capture, though, was what the creature had been doing. In the center of the clearing was an arrangement of stones and sticks, deliberately placed in a pattern. At the time, I didn't understand what it meant. It would be several more days before I discovered the truth about what lived in these mountains and what had happened to Emily Crawford 15 years earlier. The next morning, I hiked back to that clearing in full daylight, camera in hand, ready to document everything. The stone and stick arrangement was still there, and in the morning light, I could see it more clearly. The pattern wasn't random. It looked almost like a marker or a sign. 3 larger stones forming a triangle with smaller sticks arranged between them, pointing in a specific direction, northwest, deeper into the forest. I knelt beside it, studying the arrangement carefully. The stones had been deliberately placed, that much was obvious. They weren't natural formations. Someone or something had gathered them and positioned them with intention. The sticks, too, they'd been stripped of their bark and arranged in a precise pattern, all pointing the same direction. I'd seen trail markers before, of course. Hikers sometimes stacked stones to mark paths through areas without clear trails. But this was different. The pattern was too specific, too deliberate, and it was far from any established hiking route. Who would be marking a trail out here in the middle of nowhere, unless it wasn't for hikers at all? I photographed it from multiple angles, took measurements, made sketches in my field notebook. The largest stone was about the size of a volleyball. The sticks were each roughly 2 feet long. The entire arrangement formed a roughly circular pattern about 3 feet in diameter, and all of it pointed northwest toward the deepest, most remote part of the forest. I stood up and looked in the direction indicated. Through the trees, I could see only more forest, dense and seemingly impenetrable. No trails, no clearings, nothing but old-growth wilderness. But something about it called to me. The scientist in me needed to know where those markers led, what they might reveal. I returned to my camp, my mind racing with possibilities. I spent an hour organizing my day pack, making sure I had everything I might need for an extended hike into unknown terrain. Water, 2 liters, energy bars, 6 of them, my GPS unit with fresh batteries, camera with an extra memory card, first aid kit, compass as backup to the GPS, bear spray, whistle in case I needed to signal for help, waterproof matches, emergency blanket, my satellite phone, though I doubted I'd have signal once I got deep enough into the forest. I also left a note in my tent, detailing where I was going and when I expected to return. Standard wilderness safety protocol. If something happened to me, if I didn't come back, at least searchers would have some idea where to start looking. The irony of becoming a missing person while investigating a 15-year-old missing person case wasn't lost on me. Then I made a decision. I would follow where it pointed. If this was some kind of trail marker, and the more I looked at it, the more convinced I became that it was deliberate, then maybe it would lead me to wherever the creature was coming from. I returned to my camp, packed a day bag with water, energy bars, my GPS unit, camera, and bear spray, and set out following the direction indicated by the marker. The terrain grew progressively more difficult. The forest became denser, the undergrowth thicker. I was moving through old growth forest now, Douglas firs and ponderosa pines that had been standing for centuries, their trunks so thick it would take 3 people holding hands to encircle them. The air here felt different, heavier somehow. The canopy was so thick that even though it was mid-morning, the light filtering down had a greenish, underwater quality. Moss covered everything, the tree trunks, the fallen logs, even some of the larger rocks. It created a soft, muffling effect that deadened sound. My footsteps were nearly silent on the thick carpet of needles and moss. I moved slowly, carefully, watching where I stepped. The terrain was treacherous in places, hidden holes where rocks had tumbled into gaps between tree roots, slick patches of moss that could send you sliding down steep grades. I used my hiking poles for balance, planting them carefully with each step. After about 2 hours of hiking, I found another marker. This one was simpler, just 3 stones stacked in a cairn with a single branch laid across the top, again pointing northwest. I documented it and continued. The pattern repeated. Every half mile or so, I'd find another marker. Stones, sticks, sometimes both. Always pointing in the same direction, leading me deeper and deeper into the wilderness. I was far beyond any established trail now, in terrain that probably hadn't seen a human visitor in decades. I stopped for a water break around 11, checking my GPS to mark my progress. I'd traveled about 4 miles from my camp in a roughly straight line, climbing steadily in elevation. I was now at about 5,200 feet, in a part of the Plumas National Forest that appeared to have no official designation on my topographic maps. Just blank green indicating forest, no trails, no landmarks, nothing. The isolation was both exhilarating and unsettling. This was true wilderness, the kind that was becoming increasingly rare in the lower 48 states. No cell phone service, no hikers, no sounds of civilization at all. Just me and the ancient forest and whatever had created those markers. I ate an energy bar and drank half a liter of water, then continued. The markers led me through increasingly difficult terrain. I had to navigate around massive fallen trees, their root balls torn from the earth, creating walls of dirt and rock 8 feet high. I crossed small streams, the water so cold, it made my feet ache even through my waterproof boots. I climbed over rocky outcrops where I had to use my hands as much as my feet, my day pack throwing off my balance. Around midday, I checked my GPS. I'd traveled nearly 6 miles from my camp, climbing steadily in elevation. I was at about 5,800 feet, in a part of the Plumas National Forest that didn't even have a name on the map. I should turn back, I thought. This was getting dangerous. I was alone, far from any help, following mysterious markers left by a creature I barely understood. But scientific curiosity is a powerful thing. I'd spent my entire career studying wildlife, trying to understand animal behavior, and here I had evidence of something extraordinary, something that could rewrite our understanding of the natural world. How could I turn back now? The internal debate raged as I stood there on that ridge, looking down into the pristine valley below. The rational part of my brain, the part trained in risk assessment and safety protocols, was screaming at me to turn around. I'd already pushed the boundaries of reasonable solo hiking. I was in unmapped territory, following trails created by an unknown creature with no backup and limited supplies. But the other part of me, the part that had chosen wildlife biology over a comfortable suburban life, the part that had always felt more at home in the wilderness than in civilization, that part was pulling me forward. This was why I'd become a biologist, not to sit in an office analyzing data, but to be out here in the field, discovering, observing, experiencing the natural world firsthand. And there was something else, a feeling I couldn't quite articulate, a sense that I was meant to be here, that somehow all my years of training and experience had led to this moment, that whatever was at the end of these trail markers was something I needed to find. I took a long drink of water, ate another energy bar, and made my decision. I would continue, but I'd be careful. I'd stay alert. And if things felt too dangerous, if I encountered anything that seemed like a genuine threat, I'd retreat immediately. I kept going. Another hour of hiking brought me to a ridgeline. Below, stretching out in a long valley, was some of the most pristine forest I'd ever seen. No logging, no trails, no signs of human presence. Just ancient trees and thick undergrowth, a wilderness that looked exactly as it had 1,000 years ago. The valley was roughly 2 miles long and maybe half a mile wide, surrounded on all sides by steep ridges that would make access incredibly difficult. It was a natural fortress, protected by geography from the encroachment of human civilization. I could see why something might choose to make its home here. This was as remote and isolated as you could get in the lower 48 states. And there, at the far end of the valley, I saw something that made me stop and stare. It was a cliff face, gray rock rising maybe 200 feet from the valley floor, and about halfway up that cliff, partially hidden by a natural outcropping, was what appeared to be a cave entrance. I pulled out my binoculars and focused on the opening. It was large, at least 8 feet tall and maybe 6 feet wide. The entrance was partially obscured by hanging vegetation, some kind of vine or creeper that had grown across the opening. But I could see darkness beyond, indicating the cave extended back into the cliff face. And as I watched, I saw movement. Something large and dark moved across the entrance briefly, then disappeared, back into the shadows. My hands were shaking again, not from fear this time, but from the realization of what I might have found. A den site, a lair, whatever you wanted to call it. That cave was clearly being used by something, and all the markers I'd been following had led directly here. I lowered my binoculars and took several deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. I needed to think this through carefully. What was my next move? Did I approach the cave? Did I stay here and observe from a distance? Did I turn back and return with better equipment, maybe even with backup? The sun was already past its zenith, beginning its afternoon descent toward the western horizon. I checked my watch. 1:45. I'd been hiking for nearly 5 hours. If I wanted to get back to my camp before dark, I needed to leave soon. The return journey would take at least as long as the trip here, probably longer since I'd be tired and climbing would be involved. But I'd come so far. I was so close to answers. The scientist in me couldn't bear the thought of turning back now. I needed to get closer. I descended into the valley, moving as quietly as I could, using the thick undergrowth for cover. It took another 45 minutes of careful movement to reach the base of the cliff. Up close, I could see that there was a narrow path leading up to the cave entrance, a natural ledge in the rock that had been worn smooth by repeated use. The evidence of regular traffic was unmistakable. The rock face showed scratches and wear patterns, particularly along the edges of the natural handholds. The ledge itself was polished smooth in places, the kind of wear that came from years, maybe decades, of regular passage. And there were marks in the softer stone, grooves that might have been made by large hands gripping the rock. I stood at the bottom of that path and faced a decision. Do I climb up there? Do I approach a cave that was almost certainly the home of a Bigfoot? Every instinct for self-preservation said no. But the scientist in me, the part that needed to know, needed to understand, that part was stronger. My hands were sweating despite the cool mountain air. I wiped them on my pants and gripped my bear spray canister tighter. It was a pathetic defense against something that size, but it was all I had. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and made a choice that would change everything. I started climbing. The path was steep but manageable, with enough handholds and footholds in the rock that I could make steady progress. I moved slowly, pausing every few feet to listen. My bear spray was in my hand, ready, though I had no idea if it would even work on a creature that size. As I got closer to the cave entrance, that musky smell grew stronger. It was definitely coming from inside. I could also hear something now, soft sounds that might have been breathing or movement. Something was in there. The climb took about 10 minutes, though it felt longer. Every muscle in my body was tense, ready to react. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. The logical part of my brain was still screaming at me to turn back, that this was insane, that I was putting myself in incredible danger. But my curiosity, my need to know, drove me forward. I reached the ledge outside the cave and pressed myself against the rock wall, heart pounding. The entrance was just feet away. I could see inside now, though the interior was dim, illuminated only by the sunlight filtering in from outside. The cave appeared to be fairly large, extending back into the cliff face. I could make out shapes in the darkness, but couldn't identify what they were. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, a human voice. Female, young, speaking softly in what sounded like a soothing tone. And the words, they weren't English. They were sounds I didn't recognize, almost like a language, but not quite. Cooing, clicking, soft vocalizations. And then another sound responded. A different vocalization, higher pitched, almost like a baby's cry, but not quite human. I stepped into the entrance of the cave, my eyes adjusting to the dimmer light, and what I saw made me freeze in place, made my brain struggle to process what I was looking at. There was a woman sitting against the far wall of the cave, maybe 20 yards from the entrance. She was thin, her hair long and matted. Her clothes, what remained of them, were torn and filthy. But it was her face that shocked me. Even through the dirt and the years, I recognized her from the missing person posters I'd seen around Crescent Mills. It was Emily Crawford, the girl who had vanished in 1987 when she was 12 years old, who would now be 27 if she was still alive. And she was very much alive. But that wasn't the most shocking part. In her arms, she was cradling something small and dark, covered in reddish-brown fur. It was nursing, making soft, contented sounds. And as I stood there in absolute disbelief, Emily looked up and saw me. Our eyes met across the cave. Hers were green. I could see that even in the dim light. And in them, I saw shock, fear, and something else. A desperate kind of pleading. The baby in her arms stopped nursing and turned to look at me too. It had a small face, not quite human, not quite ape. Dark eyes that held surprising awareness for something so young. Tiny hands with delicate fingers gripped Emily's makeshift clothing. The resemblance to the creature I'd seen on my trail camera was unmistakable. This was a Bigfoot infant, but the way Emily held it, the protective curve of her body around it, the gentle way she adjusted her hold to keep the baby comfortable, these were the movements of a mother with her child, not a captive with her captor's offspring, not a victim forced into some nightmare scenario. This was a mother protecting her baby. "Please," she said, and her voice was hoarse, rough from years of disuse, like vocal cords that had forgotten how to form English words. "Please don't hurt my baby." The words hung in the air between us, impossible and yet undeniable. I stood there, one hand still gripping my can of bear spray, the other hanging uselessly at my side, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Emily Crawford, missing for 15 years, sitting in a cave nursing what appeared to be a Bigfoot infant. My mouth opened, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? What words existed for a moment like this? I'd spent my entire career studying the natural world, documenting animal behavior, analyzing data with scientific precision. But nothing in my training, nothing in all my years of fieldwork had prepared me for this. I stood frozen in that cave entrance, my mind trying to reconcile what my eyes were seeing with what should be possible. Emily Crawford, missing for 15 years, sitting in a cave nursing what appeared to be an infant Bigfoot. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft sounds of the baby feeding and my own ragged breathing. "I'm not going to hurt anyone," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Emily, my name is Catherine Hayes. I'm a wildlife biologist. I've been tracking." I paused, not sure how to explain. "I've been following trail markers through the forest." Emily's grip on the infant tightened protectively. Her eyes never left mine, evaluating, trying to determine if I was a threat. Up close, I could see she was malnourished, her cheekbones sharp beneath dirt-smudged skin. But there was also a fierceness in her expression, a mother protecting her child. "You followed the markers," she said slowly, as if testing the words. Her voice had an odd quality to it, like someone who hadn't spoken English in years. "Then you know about them, about the Saskat." "The Saskat," I repeated. "Is that what you call them?" "It's what they call themselves," Emily said. "At least, that's the closest I can translate it into human language." She shifted slightly, adjusting the infant in her arms. It had stopped nursing and was now looking at me with dark, curious eyes. "This is Kayla. She's 3 months old. And before you ask, yes, I'm her mother." The implications of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I leaned against the cave wall, my legs suddenly unsteady. "How is that even possible?" "I've had 15 years to figure that out," Emily said, with something that might have been bitter humor. "Turns out we're closer to them genetically than anyone knew." "Close enough for," she gestured at the baby, "this." "I need to sit down," I said. Emily nodded toward a pile of what looked like dried grasses and leaves arranged into a rough nest against the cave wall. I moved slowly, keeping my movements non-threatening, and sat down. The cave was larger than I'd initially thought, extending back into darkness. I could make out what looked like stored food, nuts, and dried berries arranged in neat piles. Animal hides stretched across the rock, evidence of long-term habitation. "Tell me what happened," I said. "How did you end up here?" Emily looked down at her daughter, running a gentle finger across the baby's fuzzy head. "It's a long story. I have time," I replied. "And Emily, your family, they've been looking for you. Your parents, they never stopped searching." Something flickered across Emily's face. Pain, guilt, longing. "How are they? Are they still alive?" "Your mother is. Your father passed away 6 years ago, heart attack. But your mother, Linda, she still lives in Crescent Mills. She never moved, just in case you came home." Emily closed her eyes, tears leaving clean tracks through the dirt on her face. I wanted to go back so many times, but I couldn't. They wouldn't let me. And then, after a while, I realized I didn't want to anymore. This became my home. "Who wouldn't let you?" I asked. "The Saskat?" "At first, yes, but later I chose to stay." Emily settled herself more comfortably against the wall, Kayla dozing in her arms. I should start at the beginning. It was August 1987. I was 12 years old. My parents were fighting a lot that summer. Dad was drinking, Mom was crying. I just wanted to get away from it all. So I went hiking. Alone. Stupid, I know. I went too far, got turned around. By the time I realized I was lost, it was getting dark. She paused, her gaze distant, lost in memory. I tried to find my way back, but I just got more lost. And then it got dark. Really dark. I'd never experienced darkness like that before. No streetlights, no house lights, just Nothing. I was terrified. I climbed a tree thinking maybe I'd be safer up there. That's where I was when they found me. Who found you? Two of them. A mated pair. The male was enormous, had to be 8 feet tall. The female was smaller, maybe 7 feet. They heard me crying, I think, came to investigate. I was so scared I couldn't even scream. I just froze, pressed against the tree trunk, sure I was about to die. But they didn't hurt you, I said. No, they didn't. The female, she made these soft sounds, almost like cooing, trying to calm me down. And then she did something amazing. She reached up and gently touched my foot. Just a touch, but it was, I don't know how to explain it. It was a gesture of reassurance, like she was saying, "It's okay, you're safe." Emily shifted Kayla to her other arm. The baby made a small sound of protest, then settled again. They stayed with me that whole night, sat at the base of my tree, keeping watch. I could hear other animals moving around in the darkness, but nothing came close. In the morning, the female climbed up. She was so gentle, so careful. She held out her hand to me, and I don't know why. Maybe because I was exhausted and scared and just wanted someone to take care of me, but I took it. "She brought you here," I said. "Not right away. First, she took me to her den. It was smaller than this cave, just a hollow under some rocks. She fed me berries and roots mostly. Tried to give me raw meat, but I couldn't eat it. She seemed to understand. Over the next few days, she kept me close, protected me. And I started to understand that she'd lost a child recently. I found out later from others in the clan that her infant had died just weeks before. Birth defect, probably. She was still grieving. And she saw you as a replacement," I said quietly. Emily nodded. "I think so, at least at first. But it became more than that. She taught me how to survive out here, how to find food, how to avoid predators, how to move through the forest safely. The male, her mate, he was more wary of me, but he tolerated my presence because she wanted me there. Your parents were searching for you," I said. "There were massive search parties, helicopters, search dogs. How did they never find you? The Saskat are experts at staying hidden. It's what they've been doing for thousands of years. When they heard the helicopters, they'd move deeper into the forest, into places humans never go. And they taught me to hide too. There were a few times when search parties came close. Once I was maybe 50 yards from a group of searchers. The female held me, kept her hand gently over my mouth. Not to hurt me, just to keep me quiet. And I didn't make a sound. I didn't try to call out. Why not? I had to ask. "Emily, you could have been rescued. You could have gone home." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Could I? I was 12 years old. My parents were fighting. I felt invisible, unwanted. And then suddenly I was with someone who desperately wanted me, who cared for me, protected me, who treated me like I mattered. I know it sounds crazy, but I didn't want to be rescued. "What about as you got older?" I pressed. "When you were 15, 16, you must have thought about going back then." "I did," Emily admitted. "There were times I thought about leaving, trying to find my way back to civilization. But by then, I'd been with them for years. I understood their language, their ways. I was part of the clan. And," she paused, "there was someone." "The father of your child," I said. "His name is Naruk. He's," Emily smiled slightly, "he's wonderful, strong, gentle, protective. We've been together for 5 years now, mated in their terms." "Where is he now?" I asked, suddenly aware that we were alone in the cave. "Hunting. He left before dawn to check the trap lines. He sets snares for rabbits, deer. We eat meat now. My stomach adjusted to it over the years. He'll be back before dark." I glanced at the cave entrance. The sun was already beginning its descent. I'd been gone from my camp for hours. "Won't he be alarmed to find me here?" "Probably," Emily said. "But I'll explain. I'll tell him you're not a threat. She looked at me intently. "You're not, are you? You're not going to report this? Bring people here." "I should," I said honestly. "Emily, you're a missing person. Your mother deserves to know you're alive. And what you're describing, a relationship with a Bigfoot, a hybrid child, this is extraordinary. This could change everything we know about primate evolution, about human ancestry. It could also destroy them," Emily said sharply. "If the world knew they existed, what do you think would happen? Hunters would come, scientists wanting to study them. The government would probably try to capture them. Their forest would be invaded, their way of life destroyed. The Saskot have survived by staying hidden. I won't be the one who exposes them." She had a point. I'd seen enough of human nature to know she was probably right. The discovery of a living Bigfoot population would bring chaos to these mountains. But how could I just walk away from this? How could I keep this secret? "Let me think about it," I said finally. "But Emily, I need to understand more. How many of them are there? How do they live? How did you and Narok, how did that even happen?" Emily settled back against the wall, clearly preparing for a long explanation. "There are 32 of them in this clan. That's what they call their family groups. Clans. There are other clans scattered through these mountains and probably in other mountain ranges across the west. But this is the only group I've had contact with. They live in small family units, usually a mated pair and their offspring. The young stay with their parents until they're mature, around 15 or 16 in their years. Then they either join another clan or start their own." "They have language," I said. "You mentioned understanding them. Yes, it's complex. Lots of vocalizations, but also gestures, body language. It took me years to become fluent. They have words for things we don't even have concepts for. Ways of describing the forest, the seasons, the relationship between predator and prey. They're incredibly intelligent, more than most humans would believe." "And Narok," I prompted. Emily's expression softened. "I met him when I was 18. He was 20, still young by their standards. Most of the clan had accepted me by then, but Narok was the first one outside of my adoptive parents who really saw me as, I don't know, as equal, not just a strange, hairless creature they tolerated. He taught me to climb the way they do, to move through the trees. We spent a lot of time together. When did it become more than friendship? When I was 22. She looked down at sleeping Kayla. "I know how it sounds. I know what people would think, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't some kind of bestiality or whatever judgment people would make. Narok is a person. He thinks, he feels, he has hopes and fears and dreams. We fell in love the way any two people do, slowly, naturally. And the biology," I started to say. "Works better than you'd think," Emily interrupted. "We're not as different as we look. Similar enough in the ways that matter. Pregnancy was normal, 9 months. Kayla's birth was difficult. No doctors, no hospitals, just me and the clan females who knew what to do. But we both survived." "Is she?" I hesitated, not sure how to ask. "Is she healthy? Normal development?" "She's perfect," Emily said fiercely. "Hybrid vigor, maybe. She's strong, healthy, developing faster than a human infant would. She can already grip and hold her head up. The clan females say she's advanced even compared to their own young." I sat there absorbing all of this, my scientific training warring with the emotional reality in front of me. This was the discovery of a lifetime, proof not just that Bigfoot existed, but that they were close enough to human to produce viable offspring. The implications were staggering. But there was also Emily herself, a woman who'd been missing since childhood, who'd built an entire life in the wilderness with these creatures, who'd found love, purpose, belonging. Who was I to disrupt that? And what about Kayla? What would happen to a half-human, half-Sasquatch infant if the world knew about her? "I need to ask you something," Emily said, interrupting my thoughts. "Why were you following the markers? What were you really looking for?" I explained about the livestock killings, about being sent to investigate, about the trail camera footage I'd captured, and the decision to follow the markers to their source. As I talked, Emily's expression grew concerned. The livestock. That was probably Narok. He's been taking calves from the ranch at the edge of our territory. I told him it was risky, that it might draw attention, but prey has been scarce this year. The drought affected everything. The deer population is down. The usual food sources aren't enough. So he took the calves, I said, and buried the remains, trying to hide the evidence. He was trying to protect the clan, but instead he led you right to us. A sound from outside the cave made us both freeze. Heavy footsteps on the rock ledge, approaching fast. Emily stood quickly, still cradling Kayla. That's Narok. Let me talk to him first. Please, stay calm. Don't make any sudden movements. A massive figure appeared in the cave entrance, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. Even crouched to fit through the opening, Narok was enormous. As he straightened inside the cave, I estimated he was at least 8.5 feet tall, maybe taller. His body was covered in thick reddish-brown fur, darker on his back and shoulders. His arms were incredibly long, his hands the size of dinner plates. But it was his face that transfixed me. It was simultaneously ape-like and disturbingly human. Intelligent dark eyes that immediately locked onto me with an expression of alarm and aggression. He made a sound, low and rumbling, that I felt in my chest. It was clearly a challenge or a warning. Emily stepped between us, speaking quickly in that language of vocalizations and gestures. Narok's gaze never left me, but his posture shifted slightly, becoming less overtly threatening, though still wary. The exchange between them lasted maybe 2 minutes. I caught fragments that sounded almost like words, but mostly it was sounds I couldn't begin to replicate. Finally, Narok made what sounded like a reluctant grunt of acknowledgement. Emily turned to me. He understands you're not an immediate threat, but he's not happy you're here. He wants to know what you want, what your intentions are. I want to understand, I said, speaking slowly and clearly, hoping Narok might comprehend some of my words, even if he couldn't speak them. I want to learn about your people, and I want to help protect you if I can, Emily translated. Narok listened, then responded with a series of vocalizations that sounded skeptical. Emily nodded. He says humans always say they want to help, but humans also destroy everything they touch. Why should he trust you? It was a fair question, I thought carefully before answering, because I've spent my entire career studying wildlife, trying to protect endangered species. I understand what happens when humans discover something rare and unique. I've seen species hunted to extinction, habitats destroyed. If I wanted to exploit this discovery, I could. I have photos, evidence, GPS coordinates. But I'm here asking permission instead. Emily translated again. This time, Narok's response was longer, more animated. His hands moved expressively as he spoke, emphasizing certain points. When he finished, Emily looked troubled. He says you might not want to exploit us, but others will. If you know we exist, eventually you'll tell someone. You'll have to. And once one human knows, others will follow. It always happens. He's seen it before. Before? I asked. He's had contact with humans? A long time ago, Emily said. When he was young, hunters came into their territory. They killed his mother, shot her, and took her body. The clan never found out what happened to her remains. His father raised him alone. I felt a chill run through me. I'm sorry, I said, looking at Narok. I'm sorry that happened to your mother. Narok watched me for a long moment, then made a softer sound. He moved to Emily's side, gently taking Kayla from her arms. The baby made happy gurgling sounds, clearly recognizing her father. Seeing this massive creature cradle an infant so gently, so carefully, made something shift in my chest. Can I ask you something? I said to Emily. What do you need? What would make life better for your clan?" Emily exchanged glances with Narok, then said, "Safety, territory. We need the humans to stop encroaching on our forest. The logging companies keep pushing deeper. The ranchers expand their grazing lands. Every year we have less space, less prey, less safety." And with Kala, she gestured at her daughter, "We need to think about the future. What kind of world will she grow up in? Will there even be space for beings like her?" "What if I could help with that?" I said, an idea forming. "What if I could use my position to protect this area, create a wildlife corridor, restrict development? I have connections with the Forest Service, with conservation groups. I might be able to establish protections without revealing why they're needed." Emily translated for Narok. His response was cautious but intrigued. He made a series of clicking sounds, gestured toward the cave entrance, then back at me. Emily nodded. "He wants to show you something. Are you willing to follow him?" I looked at the massive Sasquatch holding his infant daughter with such tenderness. I thought about Emily, who'd survived and thrived in this impossible situation. I thought about everything I'd learned in the past hour that challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. "Yes," I said, "I'm willing." Narok handed Kayla back to Emily, then moved toward the cave entrance. He paused, looking back at me, clearly expecting me to follow. I stood, brushed off my pants, and moved toward him. Emily called out behind me, "Catherine, thank you for listening, for trying to understand." "I'm a scientist," I said. "Understanding is what I do." Narok led me out of the cave and along the narrow rock ledge, but instead of descending the way I'd come up, he moved along the cliff face to another ledge I hadn't noticed. This one sloped upward, becoming a natural path that switchbacked up the rock. He moved with incredible grace and confidence, his large hands and feet finding purchase easily on the stone. I followed as best I could, my heart racing both from exertion and nervousness about the drop below. We climbed for about 15 minutes until we reached the top of the cliff. The view was breathtaking. The entire valley spread out below us, pristine forest stretching for miles. The sun was low now, painting everything in gold and amber light. Narok moved to the edge and sat down, his legs dangling over the drop. He gestured for me to join him. I sat, keeping a respectful distance. For several minutes, we just sat there in silence, watching the forest below. Then Narok began to speak. Even though I couldn't understand his language, there was something in his tone, in the rhythm of his words, that conveyed meaning. He was telling me something important. He gestured across the valley, sweeping his arm to encompass the entire visible landscape. Then he placed his hand over his heart and swept his arm again. "This is home," I understood. "This is what matters." He pointed down at the cave where Emily and Kayla were, then at himself, then made a cradling gesture. "Family." Then his tone changed, became harder. He pointed to the horizon where I could barely make out a thin line that might have been a road. He made chopping motions with his hand, sounds that might have been trees falling, destruction, encroachment, threat. He turned to me, those intelligent eyes boring into mine. He touched his chest, then mine, then pointed at the valley again. A question: would I help? Could I help? "I'll try," I said, knowing he couldn't understand the words but hoping my tone conveyed sincerity. "I'll do everything I can to protect this place." Narok studied me for another long moment, then made a sound that might have been acceptance or resignation. He stood, offered me his hand. His massive palm completely engulfed mine, but his grip was gentle, careful not to hurt me. We shook hands. A human gesture from a non-human being, a promise. We descended back to the cave as the sun set. Emily had lit a small fire near the entrance, the smoke finding its way out through natural vents in the rock. She'd laid out food, nuts, berries, some dried meat. Kayla was nursing again, content in her mother's arms. "You should stay tonight," Emily said. "It's too dangerous to hike back in the dark. You could fall or encounter a real predator. We have space." I accepted, not just because she was right about the danger, but because I wanted to observe more, to understand more. I spent that evening sitting by the fire, watching Emily and Narok interact like any couple with a new baby. He brought her water, made sure she was comfortable. She spoke to him in their shared language, gesturing animatedly as she told him about her day. He listened attentively, occasionally making sounds of acknowledgement or surprise. When Kayla fussed, Narok took her and walked her around the cave, making soothing rumbles deep in his chest. The baby calmed immediately. I saw Emily watching them with such love and contentment on her face that I felt a pang of something like envy. Despite everything, despite the impossibility of her situation, she'd found something many people search their whole lives for. She'd found home. That night, I slept on a pile of dried grasses Emily had prepared for me. It was surprisingly comfortable. I woke several times, hearing Kayla making small sounds, hearing Emily and Narok's quiet conversations in the darkness. But I felt safe, protected. These beings who everyone thought were monsters, who existed only in blurry photographs and unreliable testimony, were gentler than most humans I'd known. In the morning, Narok brought me breakfast. Fresh berries he'd gathered at dawn, nuts, even a piece of honeycomb he'd apparently harvested from a wild hive. He set it in front of me with the same care he showed when feeding his daughter. Emily smiled at my expression. "He's thanking you," she said, "for not running away screaming last night, for trying to understand." I looked at Narok, this massive being who defied everything I'd been taught about the natural world. "Thank you," I said, "for trusting me." We spent the morning talking more. Emily told me stories of her years with the clan, of learning to forage and hunt, of the ceremonies they held to mark the changing seasons. She showed me some of the tools they used: stones shaped for grinding nuts, sticks sharpened for digging roots. Simple technology, but effective. She also told me about the other clan members I hadn't met yet. The elder female who led the group, making decisions about when to move, where to den. The younger males who ranged widely, exploring territory and watching for threats. The adolescents who played and practiced the skills they'd need as adults. It was a complete society, hidden in these mountains for who knew how long. Around midday, I knew I needed to leave. I'd been gone from my camp for almost 24 hours. My supervisor would be expecting a check-in call, and I'd have no signal until I got back to my truck. "I have to go," I told Emily, "but I'll come back, and I'll start working on protections for this area immediately." Emily walked me to the cave entrance. Narok stood behind her, Kayla in his arms. Before I left, Emily grabbed my hand. "Catherine," she said quietly, "please, don't tell my mother you found me. Not yet. I need to prepare for that. I need to figure out how to explain." I nodded slowly. "I understand. But Emily, she deserves to know you're alive. Even if you can't come home, she deserves that peace." "I know," Emily said. "Just give me time. Give me a chance to figure out how." "I'll give you 2 weeks," I said. "Then I need to tell her something. She's been waiting 15 years. I can't let her wait any longer than that." 2 weeks, Emily agreed. "Thank you." I left the cave and began the long hike back to my camp. It took me most of the afternoon, following the markers in reverse. When I finally reached my tent, everything was exactly as I'd left it. My equipment, my cameras, my notes, as if the past day had been a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, all of it. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into conservation work with renewed purpose. I contacted every connection I had at the Forest Service, at environmental nonprofits, at state agencies. I proposed the creation of a new wilderness study area, citing concerns about wildlife corridors and old-growth forest preservation. I pulled together data on elk migration, bear denning sites, spotted owl habitat, anything that might justify protecting the valley where Emily and her family lived. It helped that I had legitimate scientific reasons for the protections. The area was truly ecologically significant, but my real motivation, the family of Sasquatch living in that cave, that had to remain secret. On the 13th day, I made the hardest decision of my life. I drove to Crescent Mills and knocked on Linda Crawford's door. She answered, a woman in her late 50s with graying hair and tired eyes that had spent 15 years hoping. Mrs. Crawford, I said, my name is Dr. Catherine Hayes. I'm a wildlife biologist working in the Plumas National Forest. May I come in? I have information about your daughter. What I told her was carefully crafted truth, mixed with necessary omissions. I told her I'd found evidence that Emily had survived in the wilderness, living with a small, isolated community in the mountains. I told her Emily was alive, healthy, and had chosen to remain where she was. I told her Emily wanted her to know she was safe and that she thought about her mother every day. What I didn't tell her was the nature of the community Emily lived with. I didn't tell her about Narok or about Kayla. Those details weren't mine to share. Linda cried. She laughed. She demanded to see Emily, to go to her immediately. I gently explained that Emily wasn't ready for that yet, that she needed time to prepare, that the life she'd built was unconventional and she was afraid of judgment. Is she happy? Linda finally asked, her voice breaking. That's all I need to know. Is my daughter happy? Yes, I said honestly. She's happy. She's found purpose and love and belonging. Then I can wait a little longer, Linda said. If she's alive and happy, I can wait. It's been 3 years since that September day when I followed markers into the wilderness and found something impossible. The wilderness protection I fought for was approved. The valley where Emily's clan lives is now part of a designated wildlife corridor, protected from logging and development. I check on them regularly, bringing supplies, sometimes medicine that Emily needs, tools that Narok can use. I've become part of their lives, a bridge between their hidden world and mine. Kayla is 3 now, a healthy, energetic toddler who's somehow both human and not. She climbs like her father and chatters like her mother. She's the future of something we don't even have a name for yet, a blending of 2 species we thought couldn't blend. Emily and Linda have reconciled carefully, slowly. Linda visits twice a year, always escorted by me, to ensure the secrecy of the location. She's met Narok, accepted him as her son-in-law, with more grace than I would have expected. She's a grandmother who can never tell anyone about her extraordinary grandchild. The secret weighs on me sometimes. I have evidence that could revolutionize our understanding of human evolution, of primate biology, of what's possible in this world. But I also have a responsibility to the beings who trusted me with that knowledge, to the family who let me into their cave and their lives. Science isn't just about discovery. It's also about ethics, about understanding when knowledge should be shared and when it should be protected. The Sasquatch have survived this long by staying hidden. Emily found a life worth living by accepting that invisibility. Who am I to take that away from them? So I keep their secret. I do my work, protect their territory, and visit when I can. And sometimes, when I'm sitting in that cave watching Narok teach Kala how to crack nuts or listening to Emily sing lullabies in a language no human should know, I think about what I found in those mountains. I didn't just find a missing girl. I found proof that family, love, and belonging transcend species. That home is wherever you're accepted for who you are. That some of the most important discoveries are the ones you keep to yourself. Emily Crawford vanished in 1987. I found her 15 years later, raising a baby Bigfoot as her own. And what I discovered wasn't just about cryptozoology or human evolution. It was about the choices we make, the secrets we keep, and the extraordinary ways that life finds a way to survive, adapt, and flourish, even in the most impossible circumstances. That's the truth. The whole truth, and it's a truth that will die with me, because some things are more important than being right, than being believed, than even being understood. Some things are sacred, and family, no matter what form it takes, is always sacred.